Welcome to the debate. When Tabitha died, the church did not first show speeches. The widows showed garments.
Right.
And, the works of Tabitha really reveal a woman that the early church simply refused to lose. We are looking at a story in the book of Acts that fundamentally alters how we understand the early Christian movement.
It really does.
Yeah. So the central question we have to press here, as historical and biblical investigators, is this. Why did Acts preserve this short 9-verse story about Tabitha in Joppa?
Well, it's a fascinating inclusion.
Exactly. And my position is that the text prioritizes the immense weight of her life long before the miracle of her resurrection ever occurs. Acts focuses on her continual good works, her tangible charity, as the ultimate definition of what a true disciple looks like in the real world.
See, I hear that, but the tangible compassion is certainly there. But we are looking at a highly curated theological document. I mean, Luke isn't just writing a daily diary of early church acts of kindness.
Sure, not a diary.
Right. He is documenting the explosive, supernatural expansion of a new faith. So my position is that this story's inclusion is fundamentally driven by the theological weight of the resurrection itself. It is a massive, unprecedented demonstration of apostolic authority that literally shook the coastal city of Joppa.
But look at the literary framing, though. The author takes a highly unusual step to get to that divine intervention.
How so?
Well, consider the pacing of the book of Acts. This is a fast-paced, high-stakes historical narrative. We're talking about prison breaks, public executions, confrontations with Roman governors.
Massive theological shifts.
Exactly. Yet right in the middle of this momentum, the text suddenly hits the brakes. It pauses the grand sweep of history to give us 9 dedicated verses about a woman in a port city making tunics. The text explicitly calls her a female disciple. The Greek word is mathetria.
Which is a really fascinating linguistic choice.
It's groundbreaking. It's the only time that specific feminine form of the word disciple is used in the entire New Testament.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the early church had never seen this level of foundational leadership recognized in a woman in this specific way. And Luke essentially utilizes this unique noun to capture it.
Right.
That choice proves that in the early Christian mind, discipleship was not restricted to abstract theology or, say, public open-air preaching. It was practical. Her garments were essentially letters of recommendation made of fabric.
Letters of recommendation. I like that.
Yeah, they were undeniable, visible evidence of a life that served real people. If Luke only cared about the supernatural catalyst, he wouldn't have lingered on the needle and thread.
Okay, you are elevating the needle and thread, but I think you have to consider the broader narrative momentum of Acts.
Fair enough.
Luke is a meticulous historian. Yes, but he is also constructing a theological argument. If this story were merely a moral lesson on the virtue of charity, if the goal was simply to say, look at this wonderful woman who clothed the poor.
He could have just written a eulogy.
Exactly. He could have summarized her virtue and moved on. But the text is constructed around a major display of divine power. Is this text truly meant to be a showcase of her sowing, or is it a showcase of the unstoppable power of God validating the apostolic ministry?
Well, it can be both, but the text forces us to look at the sowing before it lets us see the power.
But the community didn't accept her death in a way that suggests they were just gathered to appreciate her sowing. They took immediate, drastic action to call Peter.
They did.
Right, so the resurrection isn't presented as some cosmic reward for making tunics. It is an undeniable turning point that, as the text explicitly states at the end of the narrative, causes many to believe in the Lord. That is Luke's endgame, the expansion of belief.
I agree that the miracle certainly leads to a geographical and numeric expansion of belief. There is no debating that.
Right, but we cannot divorce the miracle from the community that demanded it. Let's look at exactly what Acts 9 states versus what the historical details suggest about that community.
Okay, let's break that down. The text states she was full of good works and acts of charity. The details suggest something far more radical. She wasn't a wealthy benefactor dropping coins into a treasury to build public clout. She served widows.
Right, the most vulnerable.
Exactly. In the ancient Mediterranean world, under the Roman patriarchal system, widows were arguably the most economically and legally vulnerable demographic in existence.
Absolutely.
If you didn't have a male provider, you had no social safety net. You were effectively invisible.
They were entirely outside the Roman system of patronage.
Spot on. The Roman system was built on the principle of duot des, which means I give so that you might give. It was transactional.
Yeah, you only gave to those who could bolster your public standing or repay you in loyalty.
Exactly. And Tabitha completely subverts this. She pours her life into people who cannot repay her, who offer zero social capital.
That's true.
And when she dies, these widows don't stand in the upper room and recite a list of her doctrinal beliefs. They hold up physical proof of her love. They show the tunics and the garments. The charity was deeply relational, face-to-face, and embedded in the margins of society.
The relational nature of forgiving is deeply moving. It really was personal.
Right.
But we are tiptoeing around the elephant in the room here, how the text actually utilizes those garments in the narrative.
What do you mean?
Well, why are the widows specifically showing these garments to Peter when he arrives? The garments were evidence of her character, absolutely, but they were evidence presented to an apostle.
To make a case.
Yes, they were making a case. If we focus entirely on the warmth of the tunics and the subversion of Roman patronage, we risk ignoring the fact that those tunics were leveraged in a desperate bid for supernatural intervention.
I hear you, but leverage implies a calculation I just don't see in the text.
Really? No calculation?
No, they didn't have a theological argument to make to Peter. They had no legal precedent in early church history to cite. They couldn't say, hey, Peter, remember when Jesus raised Lazarus? Do that.
Well, true, they didn't have a textbook for this.
Right, there is none of that. All they had was what she had given them. They held up the cloth and the thread, and they let the work speak for itself. The physical weight of her compassion spoke loudly enough to move an apostle to his knees.
Which brings us to the actual logistics of Peter's arrival, because the physical realities of what this community did are staggering.
Oh, definitely.
We need to look at why Peter is called from nearby Lydda in the first place and what it cost to get him. Joppa was a working-class coastal city. Lydda was about 12 miles inland.
And 12 miles in antiquity is not a short drive. It's a half marathon on foot.
A half marathon uphill in the ancient Near Eastern climate.
Yeah, exhausting.
And we have to factor in the ticking clock of ancient Jewish burial customs. Without modern embalming, a body in that climate decomposed incredibly fast. The cultural and religious mandate was to bury the dead on the exact same day, before sundown.
Right, almost immediate burial.
Yet, what does the community in Joppa do? They wash her body, which is standard, but then they don't bury her.
No, they put her in an upper room.
Exactly. They place her in an upper room, and they dispatch 2 men on a dead sprint to Lydda. They don't say, please come help us mourn. The message they send is, please come to us without delay.
It's incredibly bold.
It's a driving, audacious expectation that goes far beyond normal grief.
And that audacity is precisely what makes Tabitha's life the anchor of this story. Let's distinguish between what is strictly theological interpretation and what these historical actions actually reveal.
Okay.
The text does not say the disciples in Joppa knew for certain that Peter could or would raise her from the dead. There was no guarantee.
No, there wasn't.
But their urgency, their willingness to delay the burial clock and risk ceremonial impurity by keeping a corpse in the upper room implies an absolute refusal to accept that her story was over.
It shows their desperation.
More than desperation, Tabitha's life created a community so fiercely loyal, so deeply impacted by her tangible love, that they effectively demanded apostolic attention. The chain of causation for this entire event starts with her needle and thread.
See, that is where we diverge fundamentally.
Oh?
Yeah, the chain of causation does not start with her needle. It starts with the authority of the risen Jesus operating through the apostles.
Okay, but explain that in the context of Joppa.
Well, you mentioned the audacity of keeping the body. They didn't call Peter because he was a comforting presence or a good administrator. They called him because he was a representative of the power of the early church.
Because he had just healed Aeneas.
Exactly. They had heard he was in Lydda, where he had just healed a paralyzed man named Aeneas a few verses prior. They were anticipating an encounter with the divine. They were operating on a theological premise, not just emotional loyalty.
But why her?
What do you mean?
The early church was experiencing profound loss constantly. We aren't talking about a community unaccustomed to death.
That's true.
Just a few chapters prior in Acts, Stephen is martyred in a horrific public execution. He is a primary leader, yet no one sends messengers running 12 miles to find an apostle to resurrect Stephen.
Right, they buried him.
The text says devout men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. They accept the finality of it. But with Tabitha, they wash the body, place it in an upper room, and refuse to let go.
A huge contrast.
The distinguishing factor in this text, the reason her death creates a different response than Stephen's, is the relentless, continual nature of her local good works. She had stitched herself so deeply into the fabric of that community that her absence was treated as an unacceptable tear in their universe.
That highlights the profound impact she had on Joppa, but it forces us into a very difficult theological hazard that we have to navigate carefully here.
I think I know where you're going.
The danger in reading this text today is that it is incredibly easy to turn this into a prosperity gospel formula.
Absolutely. We have to separate the historical event from modern exaggeration.
Because it is tempting to assume that if you just sew enough tunics, if you are just a good enough person, you earn a miracle. You earn an exemption from tragedy.
Right, which isn't the point at all.
Doesn't create a public spectacle.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't harness the emotional energy of the weeping widows. He actually sends everyone, the widows, the disciples, everyone holding the garments completely out of the room.
Which is a brilliant, necessary detail.
It is the theological mechanism of the whole event. In the ancient world, you had magicians, charlatans, and spectacle healers who relied on crowds and frenzy to perform.
Right, drawing a crowd to show off.
Exactly. Peter clears the room to strip all of that away. He shifts the focus entirely from human performance and emotional leverage to divine sovereignty.
He mirrors exactly what Jesus did.
Yes. In the Gospel of Mark, when Jesus raised Jairus' daughter, he cleared the room of the professional mourners. Peter is deliberately operating in the exact pattern of his rabbi.
That's a great connection.
And crucially, the text offers absolutely no theological explanation for why Tabitha was raised when other faithful disciples were not. It doesn't say her works met a quota. There is no spiritual transaction happening in that room.
I really appreciate that you highlight the clearing of the room, because it underscores the sheer grace of the moment.
It really does.
It is an act of God's sovereign mercy in a specific moment for a specific community. The miracle is not a reward you can purchase with enough charity. It is a restoration.
Well said.
When Peter is left alone with the body, there is no elaborate incantation. He kneels down, he prays, and he says two words in Greek. Tabitha, kumi. Tabitha, get up.
Breathtaking in its simplicity.
Truly.
And that simplicity is what isolates the power. He isn't operating on his own inherent magic. He is an instrument. But while it is simple in the room, we cannot ignore the absolute shockwave this sends through the entire coastal region.
The ripple effect.
Right. What does this singular story reveal about the broader trajectory of the early Christian community? It reveals that this resurrection was the geographic and spiritual hinge for the most massive theological shift in the first century.
You're referring to the domino effect of where Peter goes next.
Precisely. The aftermath is just as critical as the event. Acts explicitly notes that because Tabitha is resurrected, because this massive revival hits Joppa, Peter stays in the city for many days.
And where does he choose to stay?
In the house of a man named Simon, who happens to be a tanner.
Which is a detail that is so easy to read past if you don't understand first-century Jewish law.
It is a massive scandal.
Huge.
A tanner worked with the skins of dead animals. The process involved scraping hides, using chemical agents, feces, and urine to treat the leather.
Horrible conditions.
It was considered physically revolting and, far more importantly, ceremonially unclean. An Orthodox observant Jew like Peter would typically never associate with a tanner, let alone lodge in his house.
Never.
But Tabitha's resurrection blew Peter's categories wide open. The power of God operating in Joppa created a geographic reality where Peter was suddenly willing to cross a strict Jewish purity boundary.
He stays in an unclean house.
Yes, and it is precisely on the roof of that specific unclean house in that specific coastal city that Peter receives the vision of the sheet coming down from heaven, the vision where God declares all foods clean.
Which changes everything.
Exactly. That vision directly prepares Peter to welcome messengers from Cornelius, a Roman centurion. the ultimate ethnic and religious boundary. Tabitha's life, death, and resurrection position the lead apostle to open the doors of the gospel to the entire Gentile world.
It's incredible.
You cannot read this story in isolation. Luke includes it because her story is the catalyst for global expansion.
I see the massive historical ripple effect, I really do. The chains of causation linking Joppa to Caesarea to the Gentile mission are undeniable.
Right.
But I want to drive our focus back to the immediate reality of Acts 9.
Okay.
Tabitha didn't know about Cornelius. She didn't have a strategic 10-year plan for global Gentile evangelism.
Definitely not.
She didn't have a platform, a recognized title in the Jerusalem Council, or a voice in the theological debates of the apostles. She just clothed the impoverished, vulnerable women sitting right in front of her.
But you can't separate her local quiet actions from the global loud outcome. Acts links them intrinsically.
I'm not separating them. I'm trying to show what the text actually grounds them in. The massive, earth-shattering theological shifts of the early church were built on the quiet, unglamorous, daily consistency of ordinary people doing good works.
Right.
The grand narrative of Acts, the expansion of the church to the ends of the earth, depends heavily on the quiet rhythm of a woman with a needle and thread.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
The text goes out of its way to emphasize that her good works and acts of charity were done continually. This wasn't a one-off burst of generosity when she felt particularly inspired or when an apostle was in town to watch.
No performance.
Right. It was the embedded rhythm of her daily life. She was simply doing the next right thing for the next vulnerable person who crossed her path.
The word continually does carry immense weight. Consistency in the mundane is often far more difficult than a single adrenaline-fueled act of heroism.
Very true.
But her consistency was ultimately the fruit of her faith in the miraculous power of the God who eventually raised her. The story is a unified whole.
Yes, it is.
You cannot have the works of Tabitha without the God of Tabitha. The early church was shaken into widespread belief not merely because widows had new winter coats, but because a dead woman opened her eyes, sat up, and took Peter's hand.
The resurrection is the climax, yes. But the climax feels hollow if we ignore the exposition.
Go on.
If Tabitha hadn't lived a life of such radical, relational, boundary-breaking care, there would be no widows weeping in the upper room.
That's true.
There would be no urgent messengers sprinting a half-marathon to Lydda. There would be no Peter kneeling beside her body. The entire occasion for the miracle was constructed out of the raw materials of her daily compassion. The community held the evidence of her life in their hands before Peter even crossed the threshold.
When you pull all of this together, what I can't shake is the profound truth that a quiet life of service became the explicit occasion for a city-shaking miracle.
Exactly.
The miraculous power of God cannot be minimized or treated as a mere footnote to her charity. The resurrection is the definitive, undeniable event that validated her faith and physically propelled the early Christian movement forward into the Gentile world.
And I'm left looking at a completely different side of the same coin. I see a story that proves compassion leaves undeniable witnesses.
Right.
The miracle is magnificent, and its historical and theological weight is staggering. But the foundation of the story, the very reason Luke pauses the epic, fast-paced narrative of Acts to name her, is the tangible, physical impact of her love.
We are certainly looking at points of strong convergence here, though.
We are.
We agree entirely that Tabitha's story is not a formula to be manipulated. It does not promise that every faithful act will be met with a supernatural reversal of death, or that we can force God's hand by holding up our good deeds.
Exactly. Tabitha's story is powerful because before the miracle even happens, Acts shows a community holding the undeniable evidence of her compassion in their hands.
Beautifully said.
This is not a formula for guaranteed miracles, but a story about faith, mercy, a fiercely loyal community, and the God who sees hidden, unglamorous service.
It really leaves us examining the text with a deeper appreciation for how the early church actually functioned, how they valued the most vulnerable, how they defied the social norms of their day, and how they responded to the intersection of sudden human tragedy and divine intervention.
Which brings us right back to where we started. When Tabitha died, the church did not first show speeches.
The widows showed garments.
Exactly. It leaves us with a quiet, lingering question about our own lives and what visible, tangible evidence we will leave behind in the hands of others.